One of the most important things that's happened in our country's history is the addition of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States after the Civil War ended in the late 1860s. The 14th Amendment, the purpose of it was to reconstruct the Union that had been severed by the Civil War. And it was an attempt to figure out how to move forward and bring the states back in. And the desire of the amendment was to protect African Americans, the freed slaves, within the country and within a new country where slavery was now prohibited. And so the amendment granted citizenship and both state and national citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States of America. That also, the amendment also uh, made all the privileges and immunities of citizenship available to people wherever they were in America at any time if they were an American citizen. And it also granted equal protection of the laws to all American citizens. Now, on the surface, this seems pretty simple. There are many other parts of the 14th Amendment, but this is the essential part that we want to talk about here in this conversation. On the surface, this seems like a pretty straightforward and simple thing that they were attempting to do. But the 14th Amendment goes far, far beyond what we just talked about with regard to citizenship because it really reversed what was the original intention of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, were added shortly after the Constitution was written because many people feared that the Constitution itself, the 1787 Constitution, did not grant or provide adequate protections of basic rights like freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of religion and so forth. And so those 10 amendments were added to the Constitution early on and designed specifically to protect the American people from a national or federal government that would encroach on these basic rights. And so the Bill of Rights itself, as originally written and intended, was created to restrict the federal government and to limit its power and to keep it essentially out of the conversation of any of these rights that were listed in those Bill of Rights, in that Bill of Rights. The 14th Amendment effectively nationalized the Bill of Rights. And what I mean by that is it made the federal government the protector of the rights that are listed in the Bill of Rights. Rather than protecting us from the federal government, it gave the government a new role, the federal government a new role, which was to protect American citizens from state and local governments or other entities that might attempt to violate those rights that are listed in the Bill of Rights. So, just to kind of overview this, originally when the Bill of Rights was written, it had nothing to do with whether the state of Pennsylvania or your local county or local school board or whoever, what other else institution or entity may exist. It had nothing to do with whether they would violate your freedom of speech. It only restricted the federal government from violating freedom of speech. For example, freedom of religion. It only kept the federal government from establishing a religion. In fact, there were many areas where religions were actually established at that time. And so the Bill of Rights was not an attempt to limit state or local communities in any way. It was an attempt to protect the American people from a federal or national government that would encroach on their basic rights. What the 14th Amendment did was it gave the federal government the power to become the protector of the rights, reversing essentially what the Bill of Rights itself was intended to do. And now what we have since the 1860s is a federal government that involves itself in all kinds of conversations regarding freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and especially freedom of religion, um, that is triggered by the 14th Amendment and the nationalization of the Bill of Rights.